Hello and welcome to the Doof Game Club, Doof Media's exploration of the joy of play. I'm Ruben Morehouse,
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
and before we begin this month, just a quick special announcement. Um, the Doof Squad, the Doof Media Discord is now fully public. So if you haven't been on the Discord for a while, you might not know what that means. Or if you are not familiar, basically the Discord used to be only accessible to patrons. But we have recently, for reasons to help that we'll get into in a moment, made it public.
Yeah.
It's a
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's lots of shows like Game Club, Book Club, Do the Right Thing that
Yeah,
really sort of thrive, in these sorts of live communities, like Discord, and it was getting a bit silly to keep it locked behind the paywall just for patrons when we wanted to have these shows grow.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. So if you haven't checked out the Discord, you can go to doofmedia.com/discord and find a link there to join. If Discord isn't your platform of choice, we also have some other community stuff that we're trying to be a bit more active around, like the Doof Media subreddit. But Discord's the one that we are especially the most involved with for the game club. So if you're watching this show, it's a good place to head to.
Yeah, it's particularly great for the game club because Discord has streaming built in, so we have a really
Yes.
good community of people streaming the games. Like obviously Ruben and I are sometimes on Twitch, but
Hmm.
you can compare with other people, stream alongside them, and everything in the Discord. It's a really fun way to participate in the club, and we wanted to make that accessible to everyone.
Yeah. Um, cool.
So
Let's get on with it, shall we?
yeah,
So with that out of the way, let's talk about Hades, which is this month's Game Club game. Hades by Supergiant Games, who is our first developer to feature twice on the Game Club. So
yeah.
congrats, Supergiant. First Transistor, now Hades.
First repeat dev.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if we want to make a show of it, we can maybe get people to vote for Bastion or Pyre next too. We'll see.
I'm kind of
But
interested to
yeah,
play those because Transistor was first, right?
yeah. Uh, no, Bastion was first.
Oh,
Bastion was
okay.
their game that was the first one I was familiar with. I don't know if it was their first game or not, but it was definitely their first like, hey, we're here kind of thing.
Okay.
Then Transistor, then Pyre, then Hades is the most recent.
Oh, okay. I'm just keen to see what those ones in the middle are like because I can see the dots that connect Transistor and Hades.
Mm, yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see what the other two look like. Bastion beforehand and Pyre in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Bastion, I think all of their games have had. Actually, Pyre is maybe a bit of a weird one because it's got some of the like emergent narrative stuff that Hades obviously does, but it's the only one of their games that's not like a kind of action RPG style thing. It's a soccer game, which
Okay.
is fucking wild, but it's actually very fun. It's like a weird soccer RPG where you play 3v3 indoor soccer, and it's awesome. Bastion is more traditional of a game, but also quite fun.
Okay.
Anyway,
I mean,
um,
I suppose in a lot of ways, I'd say Hades is a kind of classic game format. They're just like I think what Hades does is like takes a lot of these pieces and builds them up in a way not many other games do. If that makes sense. Like there's no one particular element of Hades that felt particularly groundbreaking to me. It's just a bunch of things brought together in
yeah,
a cool way
done
and
well.
done solidly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Pyre is quite a weird game, but the through line of Supergiant's games is all kind of like fast-paced action, you know, and they've clearly in Hades polished that to a T.
Hmm.
Um, should we get into talking about the actual game itself? Hades is a roguelike, and we've covered a number of roguelikes on this show. Um, so, yeah, we've talked about a lot about roguelikes on this show, so I think we won't go into it in too much depth into the real basic stuff, but we'll probably just cover. Um, I guess we'll cover
Oh
some of
yeah,
the
so you
stuff
gave me a
that
wrench across.
Hades does
Oh
differently, or especially well, or especially poorly in this discussion, right?
yes. Sorry, I'm trying to mute the video. So I'm not hearing two of you. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, we've touched on roguelikes a bunch, but I think this one does some really cool stuff with expanding on the formula.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. Um, but should we first talk about our experiences with the game a bit more?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I played the game a bunch of times. I did a bunch of streams. Sorry, I think a plane's just going past, so I'm just gonna shut the old window there. All right. Um, yeah, so I played the game a bunch. I beat like 3 or 4 runs, I think. A fair amount on stream, and interestingly, a bit off stream, which we'll talk about as well. Um, I played it on hell mode, which I thought was fun, but I regret doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to hear about that because I had the opposite experience, sort of thing.
Yeah. Um, well, the thing about it was, I thought hell mode would be the kind of change where you make it a bit more tough, which is good, but then like it fundamentally changes the game a bit more. Where actually hell mode is basically just once you beat the game, you unlock the ability to upgrade your difficulty anyway. So I when I started playing it in hell mode and then realized, oh, if I just played it normally, I could have beaten the game and then just worked my way up to hell mode and passed it. That would have felt maybe a better experience.
Interesting. So hell mode's
So yeah,
almost just the start of the game is harder mode.
yeah, it just kind of makes it harder to get on board with, I guess. I mean, it was fine. I still had a lot of fun with it, but finding out that hell mode was just basically, yeah, I don't know, like it didn't fundamentally change the game in any ways that I thought was that interesting. It felt like a mode that really should only be for people who've already beat the game and want to play from the start in a more difficult way, which
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
That's not necessarily a criticism, just I expected it to be different to what it was.
Yeah, because I started on vanilla and did struggle a little bit. So a bunch of people got me to switch to God mode,
Mhm.
which is like kind of the opposite because it's like the easy mode.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting how they really signal that because it's in settings. Like
Yeah.
God mode isn't available by default. You sort of have to go and find it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a really interesting way of doing easy mode in that it's kind of it things just progressively get easier.
Hmm.
It's like every time I die, I was getting like 2% more defense or something. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, like it's the game handles difficulty in an interesting way. I mean, obviously, with like roguelike discussions, about half of our FTL game club was talking about the concept of difficulty in games, especially roguelikes. Uh, and Hades takes a very different approach that I think makes a lot more sense. Um, I felt a bit shitty having to take God mode because when you put it in the settings like that, it definitely sends the signal that this is like a you're too shit mode,
Mm.
which is probably a fair assessment of how I play, but I don't like hearing it.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if it would have been better if it was offered as a, you know, hey, turn this on, you could turn it off later kind of deal.
Yeah. Um
Um,
yeah, I can't remember if it was offered to me when I picked.
it's not offered to you at the start of
No,
the
hell
game,
mode
I
is.
don't think. Hell mode is, which is weird. If anything, I feel
Yeah.
like it should be the other way around.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Yeah.
Um, Although I guess the distinction is God mode you can turn on and off, whereas Hell mode you can't. I don't know. Again, that felt a little bit weird to me, but whatever. Um,
Yeah, but no, I like God mode as an easy mode because it kind of doesn't. It gives you like an immediate 20% boost, which is very much the okay, you're in scrub mode,
yeah.
but then it keeps getting a bit easier, which is sort of like the game accommodating for your lack of skill, or in my case at least, each way as you go, which is nice.
Well, yeah, I think that's good. I mean, like that's one of the things that I like about roguelikes like this that have some sort of hard progression, right? Because obviously Hades has darkness and those gems and a few other things where like you do tangibly have lasting rewards, right? and I like that because it means you're not. Sometimes I like a game that is more pure of a roguelike experience, but in a game like this, you kind of want to make sure you are progressing, right?
Yeah.
Because it is, yeah. And so having a mode like that takes that progression and says, no, you're actively guaranteed to progress in this game. Like I think that's just a good option to make available to people.
Yeah, I agree. Like there was still for me that roguelike sense of when I end a run like three quarters of the way through, I just feel shitty because now I've got to start all over again. And especially with
Yeah,
Hades, that's like half an hour to 45 minutes of my life I'm not getting back.
yeah,
Um, but that impact is dampened a bit by knowing, okay, well now I've got 10 extra crystals or whatever. Like compared to something like FTL, where if I died in the last sector of FTL, like it was just like, well, that was shit.
yeah.
But I don't think FTL would have worked with this kind of progression system as much.
I think the distinction I would say, and maybe you disagree with this, but Hades is a game where I felt like the reason I was playing it was because every time I played it and got further and further, I met new characters or I got
Yeah,
some. I definitely felt like I was progressing the story, right? Where for FTL, that's not really the case. Like, there's no story that you really care about progressing between runs.
yeah,
And so I'm more okay with it being a more pure experience because the focus is more on the actual gameplay and not as much on the narrative elements. Whereas for Hades, it feels much more balanced between playing it for the game and playing it for the narrative.
yeah. I also just think so much the way FTL was designed with so many moving parts. The
Mm,
starting kits were very sort of precise, and I feel like the
yeah,
ability to change those more than like just unlock new ones would have felt a bit weird and probably breakable. Whereas
yeah,
like Hades is like at the start of each run incredibly sort of simple in the abilities you have.
yeah,
So there's much more room
yeah,
for them to give you like unlockable ones.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the fun of Hades, you do need progression for me. I wouldn't play Hades if it was just you had all this stuff at the start and you weren't getting any new things because I think that wouldn't be as satisfying of an experience. Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way you
having
unlock weapons in Hades is essentially the same kind of thing as how you unlock ships in FTL, really.
mm, mm. Yeah, I guess the ships in FTL were like achievement based, weren't they?
Yeah, like slightly differently, but like the same sort of overarching concept of like you've played and you've done some stuff, and so now you get
So
new
now you
ways to
get a
play
bit
your
more
game.
customization. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the combat of the game, shall we? Because I think
Yeah.
we've been talking about the main gameplay of Hades, and it's worth us hitting this beat a bit. Because the it took a while for it to click for me, but once it did click, the fluidity of the combat and how well it felt to play this game when you feel like you've got some mastery of it is just so good. And I've got this clip on the screen at the moment of some of my final runs where I'm just kind of like dashing and smashing shit with my shield. And it just feels good to be basically flying around like a superhero, you know? Like watch this as I'm just kind of it's dash smash dash and there's a motion and a rhythm and a fluidity to it that makes you feel like Spider-Man. But no, like yeah, and I hinted at this before. Right, a lot of Game Club games I play just on stream because I want to kind of share the entirety of that experience. Hades is the first game where I felt like I can just kind of play it and unwind while I'm playing it and not need to do it on stream and just kind of chillax and get into this kind of zen mode of just like dashing around and hitting shit with my shield or with my sword or whatever, right? It just
Yeah.
feels good to play it like that.
I much preferred the sessions I played at where I had like people in voice chat I was talking to, or like I could see myself playing an audiobook or a podcast while playing this.
Mm,
Like it's definitely the
mm,
sort of game
mm.
where you're right, it's just sort of a good way to you just sort of enter the zone as you're playing the combat.
Yeah.
And then while you're in there, like it's great to do other stuff too.
Yeah, yeah. It just feels fun to like. And obviously, a lot of games, any good game feels fun to play, but this
Mhm.
like gets you into that Zen mode so well. I just really found myself getting into it when I got into it. Like you can see now, I was just kind of in that flow state, and that's like the ideal for a game, right? And
Yeah.
Hades is one that hits it really well.
Yeah. I didn't quite connect with it as well, but I think that's just a me thing. Like, I don't think that's a statement on the game.
Yeah. Having said that, it took me. This was my ninth session, which means about 15 or 16 hours probably before I got to this point to get into that, to get to the point where I was like really clicking with the game.
Yeah.
Um, this is another thing I want to say that doesn't really have anywhere to put, so I'm just going to awkwardly kind of stick it in here as well, which is that the mix-ups to the bosses is such a fun idea. I know you didn't
Hmm.
really experience many of these, Elliot, but
No.
effectively what happens is after a while, bosses start to change. E.g., you go in expecting to find Meg, and you meet the other Fury sisters, Persephone and Alecto, and
Cool.
it's a similar fight. They have similar attack patterns, but they all have their own unique, twists on them, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and it just feels great. Like I just love that feeling of going into the Fury boss fight and being like, oh, who am I going to fight? Oh, it's this one. I better kind of tweak my strategy a bit. There's other ones. The Bone Hydra does it too, but it's not as distinct. I actually don't know if it happens with Theseus and the Minotaur because I fought them maybe like 5 or 6 times and didn't see it that I noticed. So maybe
I,
it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure.
I assume there's like something in the code to sort of be like, you got to have fought them X amount of times before we
Yeah,
start randomizing it.
or
Yeah.
have some dialogue option or something. I don't know, but the mix ups, I just thought it really shines with the Furies. It's just such a cool idea. I just thought it
Yeah.
was awesome.
Because if you think about the other roguelikes we've played, like Slay the Spire is the first one that jumps to mind. It had like randomized bosses at the end of each
Yes.
segment, and they were from a sort of big pool. Um,
Well, yeah, not that big of a pool though, right? And I think that was one of the things we talked about was after a while, I think it started getting a bit samey with the bosses
yeah.
and with the enemies, right? Like just not enough enemies in general.
Yeah. I sort of had the same thing with Slay the Spire as Hades, where I didn't play it quite enough to sort of hit that point, but I
Right.
do remember
Yeah.
talking about that, and I haven't
Yeah.
jumped back in. So, um, yeah, I like this. This is like a much more subtle version of that I kind of dig, like having a similar sort of boss, just with slightly different modes that you're not preparing for. So you've got to come in and improvise a bit. Like it's that sort of thing where if you're going to play it 50 times, it
Oh
keeps it a
my
little
god.
bit fresh.
Yeah, I'm just reading in chat now. John is posting about the extreme measures pact. So these pacts, I don't know if you know, but they basically just make the game harder in certain ways.
Okay.
The extreme measures one makes boss fights harder. And I don't know if this is a joke or not, but John has said for the extreme measures for Theseus, Theseus gets a chariot and a machine gun, which sounds made up, but it also sounds awesome.
The chariot seems like enough. The chariots in Elysium were painful enough.
Yeah, yeah. uh, um, yeah, I just thought the boss mix-ups were great and I really loved them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, great way to add just a subtle amount of variety. Because yeah, if you're the sort of person who's going to grind out hundreds of runs, that's just one little thing that keeps you on your toes as you enter the room.
yes. Now, having said that, I do think that variety is something that this game suffers for a bit. I guess the comparison to make is with some other roguelikes that where when you play, I guess Slay the Spire is a good example because we did that for a game club. When you start a run of Slay the Spire or you start a run of FTL, you might have a strategy in mind that you're going to try to aim for, but you really do have to adapt to whatever you get dealt, right? The cards you get dealt. And the cards you get dealt in this game are boons, but I really felt like the variance of the boons was almost never enough to make me change the strategy I was aiming to do for a run. It it was almost always I go in with I'm going to try and do this thing, and then my boons support that moderately well, and then I do it. Like I never felt like the gameplay I was forced to shift around that much, and what that led to is a reduction in variety over the course of the game.
Hmm.
Um, there are some things that help for that, e.g., uh, the weapons and the fact that the game actively encourages you to use other weapons by giving you bonuses if you use a weapon that you haven't used in a while, which is a very cool system. But it even is different to me because it's like if you're making those choices before you start, you never are forced to adapt, which is one of the things I love about roguelikes. And this game just doesn't really have that to the same extent. Just led to it getting a bit stale to me towards the end.
Yeah, I almost think there are too many boons that you get in a
Mm,
run. Like, by the time I reached Elysium, I'd often have like 8 boons on me. Like, I could see an argument for having less but more
more
severe.
powerful or distinct boons.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that would sort of be my suggestion along those lines because I agree. They're often I'd get like my 3 options, and there was never anything that made me say, "Ooh, I should try and do this now." Except that one where you get 2 attack back every time you would, so you get 2 health back every
Two,
time you attack
yes,
someone.
yeah.
Um,
The dataless hammers were the ones that really had the potential to mix it up, but they're
yeah,
so few and far between. I wish there were more of those.
yeah. But like, yeah, exactly. Like, I love more of that sort of stuff, and then just having less sort of boons. Like even the chaos ones, like the chaos stuff was always this gamble of like suffer for the next couple of rooms and you'll get like this boon, but it was usually just something like an extra 30% attack, so it's not really changing what I do, it's just meaning I'm better at it.
Or it might change what you do temporarily, right? If it's I can't attack for the next few chambers, cool. Like if the chaos boons were instead were like negative 50% attack damage but plus 100% special damage forever,
Mm,
I'd be like, oh shit, like this is going to forcefully change my playstyle to a large amount.
yeah.
But I don't know. They felt temporary, and like the dataless hammers, not all of them would really force you to change what you were doing. Some of them were just like, oh, this thing that you were already gonna do is a bit better, so thumbs up. Whereas some of them are like, oh, it fundamentally changes your playstyle. Those are the ones I loved.
Yeah, yeah, I have to agree. Yeah, more Daedalus hammers. Also, how do I give Daedalus nectar?
You'd never meet Daedalus. I know how sad. It makes me sad as well. And we'll get to this when we get to some of the narrative stuff. But like, I was so excited. Dionysus was effectively the person I spent all my time interacting with for the first few runs, and then I never actually got a chance to interact with him, and it made me so sad. Like, I got the reason I was getting to the end of the game was Dionysus had promised me that when I visited Olympus, we would get to have mad parties. And then that just never really happened, and it made me so sad.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Mm.
Um, I also,
I
sorry, I just want to say, I think the runs were a bit too long for me. I don't know,
mm,
maybe I'm just slow, but I reckon you could cut a couple of rooms here and there. I know that the world records are like insanely low. I don't know exactly how that works, but like with Hades' progression, like just add areas once you beat the game a certain number of times or something.
mm. Yeah, I do kind of wish that it was a bit more compact of an experience. There are a few things like that where I feel like I don't know, like a few things have kind of gotten away from them a bit too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a little bit too much dialogue. The dialogue system is really cool, but because it's so cool, they're encouraged to use it to a huge extent, and it's a little too much. Or like some of the boons are cool, but there's a little too many boons. There's a little too many rooms. There's a little too many this and that. And I feel like there are things that I would have preferred to have seen instead that would have made the game much more to me, I guess. I don't know exactly what I'm saying, but like
Yeah.
there's just a few things where I feel like it wasn't the right not it wasn't the right prioritization. I would have enjoyed it more if things were prioritized differently.
Yeah, I definitely sort of agree because there's like moments where sometimes when I finish a run,
Mm.
I'm just amped to dive right back in and start the next one. And in those situations, the House of Hades felt like it got in my way because I felt
Mm.
obligated to go and talk to everyone because I was
Yeah.
getting like everyone was telling me I was missing stuff if I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But then there were other runs where like I finished it and I was like, oh, like that was demoralizing. and the House of Hades was like a great other thing to do and explore
Yeah.
before I decided if I wanted to dive in again.
But in that sense, sometimes there wasn't enough to do in the House of Hades.
Exactly.
Like,
Like that's the thing. It
uh,
was a 2 to 3 minute stopping window either way, and that was either sort of not enough to really satiate me when I wanted to avoid doing a run, and it was too long and got in my way when I was riding the high.
the
Um,
thing that got to me about it was because I knew I was being gated from narrative content because I have to interact a certain number of times to get the right dialogues to unlock the next thing, right?
hmm,
Um, and I wanted to get through that content, but it just meant I effectively had to just be like, okay, I'll do the chore of speaking to Hermes, and after I've talked to him 40 times, maybe I get a piece of dialogue that is like important and relevant to
hmm,
stuff. And it just felt like I wanted to either be able to explore the dialogue and the narrative a bit more actively and not have to put up with so much dialogue that is nice. And the atmosphere of the game is really good, but in the end, it just didn't really contribute that much to my enjoyment. Um, yeah, the
yeah,
dialogue to me, the House of Hades especially, felt like it just wasn't quite right. Like you said, it either got in the way or wasn't enough to feel tangible.
yeah. And I think Elliot talked about this last month when we had her on, and we talked about Hades briefly at the end. She sort of said it took a while to ramp up. And I'm definitely
Mm,
feeling that. Like I've had maybe one major story beat where I'm up to, which is like I've just, spoiler alert, found out that, Nyx is not Zagreus's mother. Um and then it's just sort of been casually chatting to people as I get their boons since then. Like I think you could
yeah.
almost get away with like quartering the amount of times you need to interact with a lot of these people to start to progress their storylines.
Do you want me to tell you something, Elliot?
Yeah.
When that happens, you like go to the bed, right? And you
Yeah.
get this flashback, and it's cool. That's the only one I've had. I've tried to continue some of these and get to that, but I've never had one where I'm actively get a bit more cutscene content like that. And that's one thing where like if there were more of those, that's a very tangible thing where I felt like there's a misprioritization. If I had more of those, I feel like I would have been able to I felt like I would have gotten more out of my progression. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Because
mm.
there's like, oh, every like 4 or 5 runs, I get like a cutscene that gives me more active story to engage with. I would have loved that. And
Yeah.
you don't have to do it. You just go to the bed and begin it when you have the next dream or whatever, ready to experience it. That system was perfect, but it just felt like it wasn't really used.
Yeah, okay. Like, yeah, like it makes sense that I've only had the one because I'm not as far into the game as I would have liked to be before I came here today. But like, you've made
No,
pretty decent efforts.
and also only had the one, and it felt to like I want more. I want
Yeah,
the opportunity to dive more into active story content, but the game just hasn't really given me that opportunity.
yeah. Sorry, I'll change the slide. We have sort of been jumping around our slide
Yes.
topics a fair amount. So here we are, sort of talking about how repetitive the game can kind of feel.
Yeah,
Um,
we're not adhering to our slides much at all. But it's like it's interesting because I think I've done maybe 30 runs. I've won, I think 3 of those runs or something like that. Beating the first run, I expected to get more of the story, and I kind of calibrated. That's like a 20 or whatever, 20-hour experience before I did my first victory, and I was like, that doesn't end the story at all, Elliot. I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to spoil it for you, I
yeah, go
guess.
ahead.
You've brought this upon yourself by
Yeah,
not finishing the game, but you beat you got up to Styx, you get out of Styx, then you fight Hades, your dad. He's like, no, you can't leave, blah blah blah. And he hints at the bigger story. He hints at, once you beat him, he hints at things like, oh, there's a bit more going on than you understand. Stuff about your mother, blah blah blah. You leave Hades, you go and you meet your mother, and she's like, oh shit, it's my son, Zag. Good to see you. And then you die. You're from the underworld. You're not meant to be able to survive, and so being outside of Hades is killing you slowly, and so you eventually die again.
and then you
And you
go
get
back to the
back
start.
you get back, exactly. And you question Hades some more, and he's like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm not going to tell you anything. And it sets up this thing of like, you're only going to progress the main story more each time you beat a run. And I beat another run, and I got a tiny little sliver of story, and I was just kind of like, I've put 20 hours into the game at this point, and I've had like maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes of active story, and it's just not enough. Like the
Yeah,
pacing of that, it was just so off to me. I just couldn't I really wanted to know more about like why has Hades set up this system where I'm being kept from my mother, and why is he refusing to let this happen, and is there more going on? Is there a bigger reason? Is Hades actually not the villain I thought he was? But I've played the game for 25 hours and I only have the tiniest hint of that, and that's just so not the right pacing for me to get invested in, you know?
Yeah. No, I'm hearing in the chat people are sort of saying, "Oh, the next big one is after 10 times you beat the game." It's like that's too
Like
many.
that's that's way off, right? Surely.
Like because
I,
you sort of ride that high for beating the game the first time,
yeah.
and you get something then, and then it's like I think the second time there's still a bit of a high, and I would have been pretty disappointed if I beat it the second time and got like not much else. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I know the answers to these questions that are there, and I know things like someone has told me before the thing that I was the most excited about, which was meeting Dionysus and getting to party with him. That is actually something that happens, but you just have to progress the game to a high extent. And I'm glad that that stuff's in there for the diehard Hades fans, but for people like me who, played this game pretty actively for a month and didn't get any of that, I'm just kind of like, what am I meant to say to that?
yeah. Um,
That's nice, but that just doesn't work for me. I can't play one game for an entire year.
Yeah, like it reminds me of sort of what I was saying about cutting the runs down and stuff. Like I feel like there's a lot of Hades where the game is definitely trying to encourage you to play it a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, which is just a decision. I don't know. I guess if I were Supergiant, I would have toned down on it a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is just a game that they're aiming to. I don't want to be like, no, that's not right, because obviously this is a game that has worked so well for so many people and has such lasting power. I have a friend who has been playing Hades fairly consistently for about a year and a half.
Yeah,
They'll go back to it every so often and just continue, and that's great. Like that is a sign of a successful game. But I can't. I don't know. It's just too much for me, and so I don't know if it's a fair criticism or not. But I wish there was a way to be like, hey, I actually just want this game to progress a bit more quickly than what you're doing.
yeah. Like a comparison that I've made in a few different ways is stuff between Hades and Dark Souls. And something that's jumping out to me here is like Dark Souls felt like it didn't want me to look for the story, so I didn't. Hades,
Mm,
I was enjoying the story and would have liked to see more of it. And it just felt like the game was keeping it from me.
mm, yeah. We should say, because I feel like as often happens, you only really talk about the negative stuff in this game, right? Like I
Yeah,
had
yeah,
absolutely it's weird to talk about it. We can't just talk about a game and praise it for an hour. I really did have a good experience with this game, and we're talking about the things that we didn't like because that's the only real meat for us to dive into. But a lot of the stuff in this game, like the combat in this game, just felt so fucking good, and I really loved it. But you need more than that. You need a bit more to keep you engaged beyond just when you get to the point of feeling like Spider-Man. And Hades, to me, that's where it kind of faltered a little bit.
yeah. I do agree that like in general, what I tend to find is a game that I only kind of liked or didn't like are the ones I tend to focus on what they did right, whereas the games that I think are very good
Mm.
it's much more interesting to sort of nitpick at the little things. And like my lens usually, at least in my head, I don't know how well this comes across, but I'm usually coming at them from the perspective of what would I change to make it even better. Um,
Mm.
and that's why that can come across as yeah, like nitpicky, like this conversation. Like it's just one thing I would do to Hades, personally, is drastically cut down the time between big story beats. Um,
Yes, for
but
sure.
like obviously, yeah, like that's not to take away from all the other stuff that is great about the game.
Yeah, I would honestly dial up the progression by about twice or three times as much, if not more. Like
I think
the
I would
amount
do
of
for more.
darkness
Yeah,
that you get, the amount of gems that you get, all that stuff. Like I feel like it needs to be dialed up a fair amount.
yeah.
Anyway,
But I guess it depends. Like, Supergiant clearly made the decision that they were targeting people who would play the game for over 100 hours.
yeah,
And
which is fair, but
yeah,
it's just we can't.
I guess that's just not
I
us.
personally just don't have that much time to invest into a game, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyway, let's talk about some more stuff that we did like.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the area of sticks, and I know this is one that you didn't really get up to, but I really, really enjoyed the sticks vibe because you play through the first three areas, which have different enemies and get harder and all that stuff, but are functionally the same. And then you get to sticks, and it's completely different in that
The
it's
rooms are
only got five
smaller.
kind of much smaller. You've only got five paths to explore, and each of those five paths is like three little mini warm up challenges, um, and then a major challenge. And it's got a few things in it like poison and different enemy types and the branching paths, or not, sorry, not branching paths, but like the choice of paths that um, that just made it feel so different and fun while still being a challenge. Weird things like the shop being mixed up so you can make more decisions about like, am I going to actively save up all my money to try and get a big thing, or am I going to try and go for small things before I fight the final boss? Like, Sticks as a final area is just the perfect way to mix up the gameplay enough to keep it really, really engaging. And I thought it worked very, very well.
Yeah, yeah. I only got there once, and it was a brief endeavor.
Hmm.
But I agree. It was noticeably different to the other areas. The other areas all had sort of gimmicks, but Sticks was immediately like, wait, what are we doing here?
Mm. Yeah. Like, oh, this is different. Like, this has just broken its own formula.
Mm.
And we were talking about how we would have liked it to mix up stuff more. I mean, this is a perfect example. I would have imagine if all four of the areas had such different. I mean, they're not even tangibly that different. It's just it mixes a few things up that makes it feel so unique.
I, I,
I guess.
oh, sorry, I was
Mm,
just gonna say, I don't know if we're giving enough credit to things like Asphodel's lava is
yeah.
actually a great example of that to me. Like the way I use terrain in Asphodel versus
Yes.
the other two is very different.
The fact that the warrior enemies respawn in Elysium as well is a mix up that does fundamentally change the way you need to interact with that. You kind of
Yeah.
have to have these moments of being like, no, I have to go in and do stuff because otherwise I'm losing my
Yeah,
progress.
well, you're on a timer. Yeah.
Yes.
And the shield guys, you actually have to worry about what side you're attacking someone from.
Yeah, stuff like that maybe we don't give enough credit. Styx is the best example to me because it changes up so radically, but the other ones do also uh, mix it up. And I think that's what helped make the gameplay of Hades feel fresh enough to be quite fun.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. In terms of variety and stuff, I don't know how much we talked about this, but I really, really like the weapons, the way they
Mm,
change it up. Like
yeah,
there was a moment about a few runs in where I had like what was my best run at the time, and I got reset, and I was like, this is shitty. Like I don't want to just dive in
yeah,
and do the same thing again. I kind of wish there were multiple windows I could escape and do very different types of runs. And then I was like standing next to Skelly as I was sort of saying this, and I was like, "Oh, that's just using another weapon, isn't it?" And like, yeah, sure enough, I switched to the bow and arrow, which I'd unlocked for the first time, and yeah, like it almost feels like a different game in some ways. Like you have to
yeah,
play so differently.
yeah.
It's a great way to sort of keep things spicy as you're sort of grinding it out.
Yeah, it really does change. Like, sword, shield, bow, and there's a gun that you get at one
Oh my
point.
god.
And when I played the gun, it was so different because I effectively was just running around shooting grenades at people. Like that was my method of engaging with enemies. And it was so radically different to what I had done before, which was like dash in with the shield or the fists, beat the shit out of them, and dash out to look for your next safe window.
Hmm.
And that it's so yeah, the way that the weapons change how it feels so tangibly are great.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that was definitely what kept me going. Again, similar to the characters in Slay the Spire or the ships in FTL. Like
Mm,
you get so much variety out of those
yeah.
totally different seed abilities.
Such good bang for buck for those. And you didn't get up to this, but you get the opportunity eventually to like um, infuse your weapons to change their properties a bit as well. Not
Oh,
to a huge extent, but enough to like make them again slightly different. Um, and that's also quite fun.
cool.
You're seeing the
Yeah.
Hades fight coming up here.
I said the final battle would be on the banks of the Styx.
Right, you were. The other thing I liked about this, another example of how they did progression good was once you get to Hades the first time, you meet a new god. You meet Demeter, the goddess of winter, who didn't know you were there until you come out into this winter. And then you're like, oh shit, like stuff is happening as I progress. And that felt
That's
so
cool.
good. I just wish there was more of it, you know?
Yeah, I think the way you met little characters, like that was always some of my favorite. Those moments where it was like, wait, Sisyphus is here?
Yeah, right.
Or like yeah, the first like it was earlier today I met Eurydice and it was like, what?
Yeah.
Um yeah, I'd love more of that sort of stuff. Especially with
Yeah.
gods. I like it could just be that I didn't get far enough, but like I'd love for more situations to arise where you like unlock a new god.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I think part of that is because Greek mythology is just such the perfect
Oh, yeah.
setting for this, right?
Well, that is actually our next slide, so
Oh, almost like I was setting up for a nice transition that you ruined by calling attention to it.
um, yeah, I love the way they used Greek mythology in this. It was all pretty accurate, like really, like they sort of you could tell they took the big parts of the myth from characters that I remembered at least, and really like ran away with it and integrated it into the story and the world they were telling in a cool way.
Mm. Um, Especially Medusa's severed head being the maid that takes care of the House of Hades.
Is that Medusa?
I
Like,
mean, it's Dusa and it's a head, and Medusa
yeah.
was killed by having Theseus, I think, cut off her head.
Oh,
So
she was too. Yeah, okay. Okay, that makes sense.
makes sense to me.
She's gone through a bit of a personality change, man. She was like
um,
she was up there for me for the worst character, dude. So like she always ran away when I tried to talk to her.
she's one of the romanceable characters in this game, Elliot. One of the few romanceable
Oh
characters.
god, there's romance. This this
I
is
actually,
Stardew Valley. I was getting made fun
I'm a
of.
little disappointed by the fact that I think only three of the characters are romanceable: Dusa, Meg, and Thanatos, who I'm not sure if you ever met.
No, I didn't.
But I would have loved to romance some of the other characters. Achilles, definitely. Orpheus and Eurydice, I would have liked to romance either or both of them. Skelly, Karen, all the big names.
Yeah, yeah. It is. I don't know enough about where those romance plots go or what they do to know why they would have decided only those three are the candidates. Um, Meg is probably at the point I'm at in the story, one of the only characters. Like she's one of the only people who I feel has an arc and is fleshed out.
Mm,
So she makes sense to me just from the perspective of she's the only one who has any depth at the point I'm at. But yeah, okay. Also, yeah,
uh,
Wildbow is pointing out that it is a pun of Maid Dusa, which I did have pointed out to me, and it is a good pun. Um,
so points for that.
But yeah,
Um,
yeah, little details like what they did with like Sisyphus or Orpheus and Eurydice, like integrating those and setting them up as little subplots was quite fun.
yeah. The artistic design of these characters as well is absolutely gorgeous. Highlights for me being Eurydice, who looks amazing,
Yes,
and the Minotaur, whose design is so radical. Like having these giant pink horns and the pink trim on his huge battle axe is just like, this guy is fucking awesome.
so much more colorful than I would have pictured myself, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely the right call.
Like, look at the horns in this picture. They're so great. You're like, this is so imposing, but also so dope.
Yeah.
Um, no Hercules. I was expecting Hercules to show up at some point. I was expecting one of the twists of the story to be that I was Hercules because Zagreus is not a character I'm familiar with. So I
I
was expecting to just turn out to be Hercules at some point.
I think Zagreus is a real Greek mythology character. I could be wrong. He's definitely a minor one. Like you can sort of tell they probably picked a minor one on purpose. Like
Yes, to allow more space.
avoiding Heracles is definitely a decision that was made from the he's been done to fucking death
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah, very
Um,
true.
like and especially I think I could be wrong, but I think when Heracles dies, he actually goes up to Olympus. Like
Mm,
he gets like god light status.
mm.
But it would probably be weird to include him as a god, so they probably just decided not to. Because like
Mm,
all the other people meeting like champions like Theseus, they died and they went to Hades, so of course they're here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
But Heracles would be a great centerpiece for some sort of like DLC pack or whatever, which added a bunch of new stuff.
that's true. Maybe that's the plan. Bring in Danny DeVito and the Marissa's dad from the OC, and have them make a DLC pack.
Sorry, why those two? What's the joke you're doing there? I'm not.
Marissa's dad from the OC is the guy who voices Hercules in the Disney film,
Oh,
and Danny
okay.
DeVito voices
Oh,
whatever that
the
fawn's name is.
yeah, yeah, okay, yep.
I'm pretty sure that's right. Is that right? Can everyone
The Danny
confirm that
DeVito
for me?
one's definitely right.
Who voices Hercules?
Ruben, this isn't a podcast. We can't just edit this out
Too
like we
bad.
normally
I'm doing it.
do.
Yeah, Tate Donovan. Yeah, who,
Okay.
if you listen to What You Say, a great show on the OC network, plays whatever his name is. Is it Jimmy Cooper? I don't know. Anyway, um, Scott, the expert, is weighing
Yeah,
in and
yeah.
confirming.
Got
Thank you,
our
Scott,
ROC expert
our OC
chiming in.
champion. Yeah. Um, that's a good idea, actually. Now that you've mentioned the idea of a Heracles, I keep saying Hercules, but you're right. It should be Heracles for this. Um, of a Heracles themed DLC. I really do want to see that. I think that would be a very cool idea.
Yeah, because new area, like new content, like again, I is always just going to be a breath of life to a game like this.
Yeah, instead of the Nemean Bone Hydra, it's the Nemean Lion, etc.,
Mm.
etc.
Oh god,
Um,
that could be fun if there's some sort of mode where you have to do 12 labors.
anyway, instead of fantasizing about our fan theory Hades game, let's touch on the narrative a bit more. I mean, we've kind of talked about a fair amount of the things that we already were going to. I did quite, I did find the narrative of Zag trying to figure out, one, who is his mother, and two, why his mother is not in the picture, a very, very compelling one, and it really was what carried me through a lot of this game. The idea of that, the idea of that very personal journey really resonated for me. And the when I finally did meet her, that really landed for me, and I thought that was great. Um, the fact that it unfolds very slowly and doesn't give you any of the answers you want after you actually beat the game is, yes, a bit annoying, and I had this kind of lack of closure around it. But it was quite fun anyway. Petting the dog is great. The atmosphere of this game is great. Like,
Yeah,
it really sells the atmosphere. Um, I loved the what do they call them, barks that characters make, like little non gameplay interrupting
yeah.
things. Like Zag comes back to hell and he says, "Oh, my back hurts from whatever." Or Hades killed me the first time I met him, and Zag goes back to hell and he has a bark about like a barb back and forth with his dad who has just murdered him. All that stuff works really well and is really great.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely have to agree. The Especially on the vibe of this game, it felt quite unique, but also very. It felt Greek mythology a way a lot of the stuff was happening. Like it was also bombastic and ridiculous, which is what a
Yeah,
lot of Greek myth kind of was.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and also, like as I sort of mentioned, you could tell that these were the same people who made Transistor, but who have had almost another decade to sort of refine their
yeah.
skills.
Yeah, definitely. The story, the evolution of the way that the story unfolds in Transistor compared to this felt very natural to me, and I thought it worked
Yeah,
beautifully.
yeah, I agree.
Um, yeah, and then the other thing that's in our list of notes to talk about is stuff that I've already kind of mentioned, which was the end of the game. Hardcore spoilers here. You beat Hades, you go out into this winter, and it starts hinting at this plot about like, oh, why is there an eternal winter, blah blah blah. This moment right here, by the way, look how slowly I'm walking right now, Elliot.
Mm.
You are forced to walk this slowly the first time you escape Hades, and it drove me fucking mental.
A lot of games do that when they're trying to build like a dramatic moment. They'll lock you into a really slow walking speed.
Yeah.
I see it a lot, and I never like it.
I, especially because in a game like Hades, where the movement feels so tactile, I really wanted to celebrate by doing things like running around in circles and those kind of natural little interactions that you have when you
Mm,
have good flow with a character. And then I just couldn't, and it drove me a little bit mental. But it's a beautiful ending. You meet your mother. It's not the ending. I mean, that's the thing, right? I was building up to this point after 20 hours of gameplay, and I got to it, and it's not the end of the game. It's not, you don't get the end credits, right? Which to me signifies this is where the developers intend for people to be able to stop playing.
yeah.
That doesn't happen until you beat the game, I don't know, 10 times or something. And that just felt so weird to me, like beating the game, having this milestone, and then being like, oh, that's it. But that's not it. It kind of felt good in some ways because I was like, oh shit, I'm so motivated to keep playing. And I did, but it really sapped my energy um, pretty quickly after that. The fact that I didn't have a good point to fall off there really left me with weird lack of closure feelings pretty soon.
Yeah. I can see from that perspective of like, so back on the forced walking stuff, like as you come out, there's that and I know this is an oft abused term, but it applies here, that the ludonarrative dissonance
Ah,
of like,
yes.
if
Beautiful. Beautiful
if you
use.
jump out there and it's like Zag's meant to be having this like epiphany as he experiences the world for the first time, and you're running around in circles doing dashes.
Mm.
Like I think they prioritized the moment they wanted Zagreus to feel and you to feel through him there. Maybe just have him auto walk, like just have it be a cutscene, I suppose, if you're gonna do that. But yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Um, Good game. I liked it. This moment of meeting Persephone really landed hardcore for me. I wish there was a bit more closure to it. I mean, Josh in chat is pointing out that it's probably intentional, which is fair, but it again just doesn't quite match with the idea that you build up to it and then it just kind of doesn't land. And it's so, it doesn't, I don't know. It just drove me a bit mental.
Yeah. I mean, I
It's
suppose.
so cool from a narrative perspective, but it doesn't feel right from a play perspective. And it made me want to not continue playing the game, you know?
Yeah, I get that. Like, I, I guess like I haven't actually experienced it, obviously, but there's that. It is the first clear. Like the game is acknowledging you have sort of finished me, and then not quite rewarding you in the way
Yeah,
you expect or feel entitled to, perhaps.
yeah.
Like I can see that
I
causing
do feel
frustration.
entitled making this point, but that's the genuine emotional reaction that I had, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's fair. I would be on the same page as you. I've tried to phrase it to be fair. But yeah, like
yeah,
I don't know why have that be a clear if it's not sort of earmarked as a big you have sort of finished the game thing. Yeah,
yeah. I'm um, I'm kind of turning around on it as we discuss it, and maybe because I've got the distance from that immediate reaction I had, it's just kind of like it is a very, very cool idea in theory to force your players to have the same level of lack of closure that Zag clearly has in the story. Like that is such a cool idea, and it does work, but it's just that's not a good feeling to have. Like it hurts to have that feeling after I've put so much effort in to beat this game. I don't know.
I think that the weird part of it to me is the decision not to play the credits. Because I'd
Yeah.
say it's pretty much established in the industry to do it like this, where you have an ending that still leaves questions unanswered and you're meant to play
Yes.
more of the game. But you usually give the players the credits so chumps like me can get that one clear, get the credits, and then be like, well, I'm done now.
Get
Um,
some closure there.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, no, I agree, John. There is a disconnect between equating clearing once with sort of beating the game. And I think that's sort of the point I'm making is if you set up a roguelike like this, I think you are setting up the expectation that clearing the path is
Mhm.
equivalent to beating it.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting discussion point, though. Like, people are talking about, first of all, the idea that it was much worse while it was still in early access, and you really got nothing afterwards, and that would have I would have really disliked that. But the idea of Deadpool raises an interesting idea of it being a product of the way it was developed, which I think is interesting. A lot of focus on the narrative and the mechanics of this game, leading to not enough focus on what should be the kind of culmination of that. How to let players stop playing the game in a way that feels satisfying. I don't know.
Yeah, I could also see a lot of the stuff we've said about how you need so many runs to get story and stuff
Yeah.
being a side effect of the fact that when it was in early access and they're still making this stuff, like they were interacting with the community who was doing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. If the community already is invested into playing the game, over a long period of time, in early access, the community's already beaten the story. And so to have it feel justified, you require another 5 runs before they get the next chunk. That obviously works quite well for a community that is there from the game, with the game from the ground up, but doesn't
Yeah.
work for people who come in
What
afterwards.
and this can be the problem with like developing a game in a field like that, because you sort of are reliant on the people in early access to like advertise the game for you in a lot of ways. Like they're the ones leaving reviews. They're the ones sort of, you know, getting other people to come and play it.
Yeah.
So you actually need to keep them happy. But then at the same time, by their nature, the people really engaged with the early access are also very much like an extreme perspective of the audience. And I'm
Yeah.
not talking about Hades specifically. I imagine this is the case with all games that sort of
I,
operate this
I,
way.
I, I think Dark Souls is another great example of this, where like there's so much in there for the super fans, you know, that I think the experience is detracted from for the people who just come in to casually enjoy it. And maybe that's fine. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Things like, oh, when you get this little tidbit of story that for the super fan, it clicks in a way that is so satisfying because they know, oh, this character is that character and this person is
Mm.
that. Whereas for the casual fan, they don't even read that. And so to them, they're like, oh, there's no story in this game at all, you know?
Yeah. But I could see how even if Supergiant wanted to pull back on a lot of that stuff, if they were developing the game in early access in that way, they may have felt trapped to not do that.
Mm.
I have no idea if that was actually the case, but like I can see myself being in the situation where if your primary audience at this point are the much more extreme ones and you're reliant on them selling the game to other people, you sort of have to keep them happy and you will be forced to make decisions that maybe aren't as accessible as you would like.
Mm.
Um, so there, like that's definitely something that could be possible.
Mm.
God, you have so
Yeah.
many death defiances.
So many what?
Death defiances.
Oh, yeah. Yes, they help. um, yeah. So we're kind of segueing into our Q&A here because we've talked about all the major things we want to talk about, I guess. But let's just do it because I've noticed something that Prof has put in chat, which is talking about, Hades is a 50-hour game to see the full story. A point I kind of want to make is the games that we play for Game Club, the fact that we play them in a month, I actually play them more than I would if we weren't playing them for Game Club. Like a game like Hades, I don't expect I would have put in as much time as I did if we weren't doing it for Game Club. And
Yeah.
so to me, like if I can't get at least the bulk of a game in the first 5 to 10 hours, that to me will make a game not land as well for me.
I will say I'm sort of the same, although I'm just the kind of person where if I'm not really getting through the narrative of a game in like 30 hours, I'm not interested in that narrative.
For you, there's no chance.
So like there's definitely a thing where I can hide behind the excuse of it's not a good fit for Game Club because it's not a good fit for me in general, but like it's definitely not a good fit for Game Club. I guess the thing with Hades is I would say there's an interesting balance here where the narrative is kind of what drives you forward, but also
Mm.
wasn't what kept me engaged in mid run. Like, does that make sense? Like the narrative is your reward
Yeah,
between
yeah,
runs. It's an
yeah,
odd
definitely.
balance.
It is, isn't it? It's interesting, and Hades I think comes close to striking that balance very, very well,
Hmm.
much more than some of the other games we played in the Game Club, like Slay the Spire or FTL, which didn't have any progression narratively. Um, yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It just again didn't feel like it quite landed there for me.
Yeah. So like Prof has sort of mentioned that part of the issues we've had with the narrative is that we just didn't have enough time to see it all. And my response to that would be, even
Yeah,
if this was a 6 month game club and I was playing Hades 20 hours a month for 6 months, I'd
yeah,
still come here with the complaint that the progression is far too slow, in my opinion.
yes.
Like, for me, it's just, it was too slow. Like, if I can play 20 hours of a game and not get a huge amount of story, it's too slow for me.
Josh has just posted something which sums up so perfectly to me, which is I have 170-ish hours and just hit the epilogue like last week, which is like that's so fucking crazy. I mean, I love that that's a game that has encouraged Josh to spend 170 hours, but there's just no world in which this would be that game for me.
No, I can't. I think the last game I might have played more than 100 hours of would be Breath of the Wild, and it's almost not worth a comparison because the narrative in that game is barely there.
It's
Um,
nothing. Yeah.
but for me, like that's the thing. The thing with a game like that is you can still get through the narrative in 20 to 30 hours if you need to.
Mm,
I
mm.
spent the other 180 hours fucking around with like
Collecting Korok seeds.
exactly like doing other stuff in the game that wasn't story related. Um, but it's like if the story is your driving force or if that's what you
Yeah,
want right now,
yeah,
it's so easy to go and get that.
yeah,
And there is like a
definitely.
bit of extra stuff you get for getting 100% completion in the game, but it's like it's very much a 99% of people won't experience this. Like Nintendo knows that going into developing it.
Mm, mm, yeah. Um, yeah, that's what it is. It's the allowing the 95% of players to get that experience, right?
Mm.
That's the thing that felt off to me about Hades is you have to be the hardcore fan to get the experience of the narrative.
Yeah, and like a lot of the people in chat right now are saying that's what they like. Like they are that
Yeah,
target
yeah,
audience of people who they want to be those people who play 100 hours and sort of really nail the game. And I guess
yeah.
that discrepancy that's coming up here is that we are not those people, and we're
No.
sort of saying, hey, why are we being sort of isolated from that part of the
N-
experience? That's a bit of a bummer.
Not for a game where the narrative is so pivotal, Like
Yes,
I have
yes,
games like fucking Fall Guys or Minecraft or whatever, and those are games where I play for hundreds, if not thousands of hours, and that's great. But when it's a game that I want to come in and experience a narrative, like
yes,
Hades
yeah.
is kind of pitching itself as, I mean, it's a blend, obviously, but to an
No,
extent,
that's an
it,
important distinction. Like, yeah,
yeah, that doesn't necessarily land as much for me, just because I feel like I have to slog so much to get to the juicy bits.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, yeah, it's again, Hades is a game that I enjoyed to a very high amount, as is evidenced by the fact that I put this much time into it. Which, unless it's a multiplayer fighting game, or not fighting game, that's not the genre, but like a multiplayer online game, usually I won't.
Yeah.
But I really did enjoy Hades to a very high amount.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, are there any other questions in the chat as we sort of head towards wrapping up?
Competitive game, maybe. But even, yeah, competitive even isn't the right word. I'm getting really into Valheim at the moment, which is just like
Yes.
hits the Minecraft beat again of like multiplayer, creative, relaxing fun, I
I've had a
guess.
lot of fun jumping into that with you. I haven't done it anywhere near enough. But I mean, same for Hades, I suppose. But yeah, it's very good. So
Yeah.
we've got the question from Josh, which is best girl, which is definitely that's actually something I should have brought up. I saw a lot of people get really into the characters for this, both
Mm.
before and during the game club. I guess I just didn't get that experience.
I got it a bit
Like
because I
in the horny
my
way, I mean. Like obviously I
oh
found a
sure.
lot of them as engaging characters, but like I've seen so much horny discussion around Hades and I don't get it.
Yeah, you're right. What is it about Hades that makes it such a horny game? I don't know.
Like, I mean, the characters could get a bit horny. They're Greek gods. Like, that's
Yeah,
a
of
given.
course.
Like, but I just like I've seen so many people arguing about whether Meg or Dusa are like best girl or whatever, and I just sort of look at them and I'm like, yeah, they're both people. Like,
They're
I don't.
fine, yeah. To me, Dionysus is a top tier pick. Then maybe Athena, another top tier pick. Artemis. Mm. Um, do you have an answer, Elliot?
I'm literally thinking about it for the first time. Does it has to be best girl. Okay.
Well, my pick was Dionysus, so
This probably says a lot about my type, but Theseus.
yeah. Yeah, no, Theseus lands for me as well. Same for Achilles. I definitely, I think, go for the, I guess I would call them the Captain America type.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh, anyway, we got a question. What weapon would you add to the game? That's interesting. I think this game did a great job at having weapons that really mix stuff up. Like there are ranged weapons that are the worst. There are melee weapons that are great.
Yeah, I did not enjoy the bow and arrow. Like once the novelty wore off of how much it changed the game from the sword for me,
Mm,
I couldn't find a good rhythm with the bow and arrow.
mm, mm.
And that's obviously going to vary from person to person. But like, I haven't seen all the weapons, so it's hard to try and think of what I could add to the variety because I haven't seen it all. But
Yeah, I can't. I think the weapons they picked for this game were the perfect blend. There wasn't too many, but there wasn't too few. I think it worked really well.
something that's almost entirely based on like counterattacks could be interesting as a bit of a gimmick weapon.
Mm,
So like something built on deflections and yeah, countering other attacks, and it does like tons of damage. But the risk is you basically have to let yourself get attacked to do anything. It
mm.
would be very slow though.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Being able to
Next question.
combo weapons would be my addition. Like take the special from one weapon and the attack from another. You'd have to be
Yeah,
careful that that doesn't break the game, but
yeah. I bet it would. But the thing about roguelikes, which is fun, is sometimes a combo breaks the game, but as long as you only can get it
yeah,
randomly, that's fine. You
exactly.
know?
I mean that ability Daedalus can give you where you get health back from the attack is a bit like that. Like all
Yes.
of my runs that went past Asphodel had that.
Had that. Yeah. Um, yeah, sometimes you get something that just works so well with your playstyle, and you're like, oh shit, this is what I've been missing.
Yeah, like I'm shit at fighting games like this, because I'm terrible at balancing that need to run in and attack and like tactically retreat. So
Mm,
I really like that one just lets you kind of go in there and just mash the button and kill everyone and be fine.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't have the patience. I either spend the whole time running or the whole time attacking. I'm terrible at sitting in the middle, which is what these games want you to do.
Mm. Um, so, yeah. The other question was there was a question. Did you notice how each area was training you for its boss from Tringa? I noticed this in Elysium when you have Theseus is basically all the warriors put together,
Yeah.
and the Minotaur is like, I guess, the chariots with a little bit of other stuff mixed in. So I noticed it there. Um,
Trying to think
and
of the
now thinking
others.
back on it, there's things like the Bone Hydra's attacks are kind of mimicked by things like the wave throwers is one of the
Yeah.
Bone Hydra's kind of themes.
Those little home seeking pointy missile things that are purple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a few things like that, which is cool. I'm trying to think back now to uh, Asphodel. Sorry, no, Tartarus. What's the
Tartarus is the
first one?
first one. Yeah.
Tartarus.
Yeah, John, I agree. I heard about the fists from Ruben this morning,
Yeah,
and
the fists are great. I
I was
love them.
almost immediately like, that sounds like my exact deal.
Yeah, they're awesome. You just like run in and do a bunch of punches and then run out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Question from John Elliot. What did you think of the music?
it didn't jump out to me. I mean, like, not I didn't hate it, but like I can't. I often had to play with the music down a fair bit because I was always streaming, so I
Mm,
don't remember thinking it was particularly great, unfortunately. But that could just be because I didn't get to listen to it properly.
mm. I think the thing that really landed to me about Transistor's music was the songs that had the vocal lines, and
Yeah,
therefore, whenever I got to Eurydice's area where she is singing songs with, and it's the same singer, I think, as well, I was like, "Oh, this shit fucking slaps." So those were always my favorite parts. Was getting to Eurydice's area, having a bit of a respite, and just listening to her beautiful voice.
yeah.
Yeah, that was good. That was good stuff. Um, yeah, so that was fun. Any other questions, folks, before we wrap up?
I've got a question. And like,
Yeah.
obviously, I know as a developer, you will appreciate this as a stupid and impossible request. But I
Hmm.
just from a gameplay perspective,
Yeah.
multiplayer in this game, would like cooperative.
I think it could be done, right?
I reckon that'd be hella fun. Like,
There are some questions around things like what happens if one person gets a boon? Do both people get boons? The same boon? Do they choose different boons from the same god? Blah blah blah. There are a few kind of implementation questions like that, but I think on its surface it would work.
yeah, I think it would be really fun to try and escape as a pair, throughout, and especially like then you could get two of the Furies,
Yeah, or
like
what it
stuff
would
like
be
that.
is it's Zag and Meg escaping together or something, you know?
Yeah, and the other two Furies are the ones who are the first boss, and
Yeah.
similarly, the Bone Hydra just gets more heads, like
Two heads. Yep.
um, Theseus and Asterius. That's when they pull Heracles in, stuff like that. Like get some of the more
Mm,
heroes. I don't know if Odysseus shows up in the game.
I don't think so.
Yeah, there you go. There's another one.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that would be fun. It would be there would be some weird things about it, but I've played other roguelikes where it's been much harder and they've done okay with it. You know, Gungeon, Crypt of the Necrodancer, etc. So
That has co-op.
Necrodancer,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Huh, cool.
You have to both act on the beat. It's weird, but it works. It gets there.
Well, there you go. When you force us to play that for Game Club eventually, because I know that is coming.
I'm not because I couldn't handle you criticizing it, Elliot. It would end our friendship, and I know you would criticize it too much.
I'd be fun to do it co-op. That's like if a Hat in Time had won this month's vote, I was very much looking forward to playing through it together. I think that would
Mm.
have been a really because I've beaten it a couple of times, so that would have been a fun way for me to
Ah,
keep it
so
fresh.
hardcore. Speaking of this month's vote, Elliot,
Yes. So
should
next
we?
month's game is going to be Blue
Whoa,
Fire.
whoa! What
Um,
is this? I've never heard of this game before.
no, so
This is the first game that I just have not heard of.
this is a very so it only came out a month ago. It came out on February 4th.
Oh wow. Okay.
Like it's very new, and I'd followed the development for a while because I saw some early like dev diary stuff on Reddit, and
Mm.
it was sort of Hollow Knight meets like Zelda and some 3D Mario was sort of the pitch, and of course
So
those are all big buzzwords for me. So I sort of followed it. Then when it came out last month, I snuck it on this month's vote.
and it won.
Yeah,
What a
and it's gonna be
twist.
it was a bit of a wild card edition. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit nervous because I've seen some reports that it can be a bit buggy. Like there is a Switch copy, but I've heard there's crashes on Switch. So like
Mm.
stuff like that has me nervous for the amount of polish going in.
Is this
Um,
the sorry, is this the newest game we've played
I think it
ever?
will be, yeah.
Interesting.
Um,
All right.
so that's going to kind of be the gimmick of the experience, I think, is that this is a new game and it's probably going to have some warts left in from being that new. And I think the developer's first like proper game.
Mm.
Um, so we'll see, but hopefully it'll be fun.
Mm. Yeah. Should be fun. Remember, folks, we'll be streaming it on Twitch and discussing it on Discord. The
Yes,
Discord, which is now publicly accessible. Way! Yeah, jump all the way back, quick.
should have chucked
There
that
it
on the
is.
end
Head to
as well.
doofmedia.com/Discord if you want to join in the conversations.
Yeah, so if you're in the chat here and you're not one of our patrons, head to that link, join our Discord anyway, because it really enhances the game club. experience. Like, when we did the clubbies, so much of it was talking about stuff that didn't happen publicly, and we're changing that.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, cool. Well, I suppose that's us for today. So we'll see you all in a month. It was the 4th of April for Blue Fire.
See you then.